Welcome to Just to Know You, the podcast that interviews regular people at SAES and finds out they are far from regular.
That's right. I'm your host, Darian Batten.
And I'm Angela Kerskaden.
Let's get started.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us here on the Just to Know You podcast. And we have with us Mr. Adrian Hoquee. He's a Torontonian. All right, that's a word that he has taught me today. A Torontonian by birth. He's been a part of SAES for 4 years, and I had the pleasure of really getting to know him a little better on the football field. I didn't know whether or not I should be welcoming or scared. But we have Mr. Adrian Hoquee.
What's going on, Darian? Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, thanks so much for being here. Adrian Hoquee. Hoquee, I haven't really heard that surname a lot. Where does that come from?
Well, I want to first thank you for pronouncing it correctly. I feel like everybody that when I meet people, the first thing that I kind of have to do is provide them with an education around how to pronounce my last name. So it's Hoquee. The correct spelling, believe it or not, is actually H-O space capital Q-U-E-E. So there's a space between the Ho and the Kui. It's actually Chinese. My great grandfather on my mom's side is Chinese, and he migrated to Jamaica from China, and that's where my grandfather was born. My mom was born. And then shortly thereafter, she migrated to Toronto, and that's where I was born.
Is there any reason behind the migrations, or was it just moving?
Just moving. You know, her mother moved to Toronto. There's a huge West Indian population in Toronto, so a lot of West Indians either migrate to I think of the kind of the hot spots being the Miami area, the New York area, and Toronto. There's a huge West Indian population. So if I had to it's so tough now when I'm answering the question of where I'm from, because it's like I'm West Indian by parentage, right? I'm Torontonian by birth. I'm a New Yorker by transplant. We'll get there eventually. I'm a Bostonian by education and occupation. That's where I first started to work. My wife jokes I'm a Midwesterner by marriage.
Tell me about growing up in Toronto.
Yeah, no, I have fond memories of my experience kind of growing up in Toronto. It was incredibly diverse. It actually reminds me a lot of my classes here at SAES. Just a diverse population of young people. I grew up in all of my classes. There were students from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, China, Brazil. It was. Oftentimes they talk about places like New York being like a melting pot, but even within New York, it feels really segregated at times. But in Toronto, it was definitely everywhere you looked. When I would go outside and play on my block, I was playing many of my friends, again, were Indian and from China. My best friend was from China growing up. So it was a really diverse experience growing up. I miss the weather growing up around the snow. It takes me to move to Saudi Arabia to miss the cold. But, we just fond memories of going sledding and skating and pulling out the hockey stick and, getting on the ice. But yeah, I grew up in Toronto. It was my mother and my brother and I. My brother is a year and a half older than me. I'm the second of 4 siblings, but there's actually a 15-year difference between me and my sister, and then a 20-year difference between me and my youngest brother. So my mom, she took a bit of a break, but she started early. It was just the 3 of us in Toronto, and she's a single parent. Raising 2, brazen boys, and just doing everything that she can to provide for us, and just really good memories of childhood. We didn't have everything we wanted, but we had everything that we needed. She worked really hard to kind of instill us with the values of just hard work and sacrifice and compassion, and she was playing the role of mom and dad. So I think around the age of 13, I think it was 8th grade. My mom met my stepfather at Caravana. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Caravana, but it's the largest West Indian festival in North America. So that happens every year, the first weekend in August. And my stepfather, he had I think he was on a guy's trip out in Toronto and met my mom. And shortly thereafter, they got married, and we then moved to New York.
Tell me about New York. How was your experience, and how was the transitioning to New York?
Man, it was tough. It was so tough. Toronto was the only place that I had called home. So it was a big move. It was leaving all of my friends, my family. But then going to New York, it was tough. It was that, hustle and bustle kind of lifestyle. I remember kind of my first day of school. If you're walking and you tripped in Toronto, somebody'd be like, "Oh, hey, you okay?" And then I remember tripping and people laughing, So you're just like, wow, okay, this is kind of a different environment. And it was just we were in a tough neighborhood in Brooklyn, and it was pretty common to kind of see violence and certain things happening in the streets, and so it just kind of there was some culture shock, definitely, and it was a rough transition. I think as a result, I definitely turned inward. I definitely spent a little bit more time kind of inside, and I think because of that, I really kind of focused on my education. I was really slow to make friends at first, but yeah, I kind of look back at that experience, and I felt like I look back at it favorably. I feel like it's really kind of helped me to grow up. I met some really great people. I have some really great friends who have been lifelong friends from Brooklyn, who I still keep in contact with, and I still go back to visit every now and again. But yeah, it really helped me to kind of grow up pretty quickly.
From New York, so Toronto.
From Toronto to Boston, from Toronto to New York, and then I finished middle school and finished high school in New York. I was in a thankfully I was zoned. So the way that it works out in New York is that you go to whatever high school you're zoned or you live near, and then they have exam high schools that you'll take an assessment to place into. And I was thankfully I was zoned at one of the exam high schools in Brooklyn, so it was one of the better high schools. So I didn't have to take the exam to get into the high school. My freshman year, I remember my mom just, sitting me down and talking to me about there's 3 different tracks at this school. There's a collegiate program where you take general classes, and then there's humanities, and there's a medical science program, and these are enrichment honors programs. But you need to have a certain grade point average to get into these programs. And I think it was a 95%. Historically, I was a bit of a class clown in Toronto, and I didn't really work hard at school. And I was just kind of oh, Mom, I don't know if that's going to happen. That sounds great. And, she just, kept encouraging me and just holding me accountable. And I worked really hard my freshman year, and I was able to get myself into the medical science program. So after that, all of my classes were I was in the gifted program, and it was a great experience. The sad thing was that, my freshman year in the quote unquote regular classes, I saw people who looked like me. And then when I got into the honors program, I was the only Black person in the class, right? So it was 2 different worlds within the same school. But it was, provided me with the right amount of challenge, and I worked really hard, and I graduated and then made the decision to go to Boston for school.
And what influenced your decision to pursue school in Boston?
At the time, I feel similarly to a lot of young boys, I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to be a professional basketball player. I think I started out as a baseball player, and then I wanted to be a basketball player. And then I was all right, well, if I don't, my mom's always talking about a backup plan. So I was just all right, well, I'll be a doctor. And then I was just I was doing a lot of research, and I said, well, all right, there's this thing called sports medicine, and it's kind of merging the best of both worlds. So you can kind of, whether it's physical therapy, athletic training, it's the whole, the medicine with the sports. And I decided I wanted to go into physical therapy, but the goal was to be a physical therapist for a professional basketball team. So I just looked into schools that had a physical therapy program in Boston. BU had a pretty competitive program. I think I also applied to UConn and to the University of Miami and a bunch of other schools. I just ended up deciding on going to Boston. My uncle at the time lived in Boston, and I'd been there a few times. And it was, I definitely wanted to get out of New York, but I wanted to be relatively close to home. And it's only 4 hours away. So I ended up making the decision to go there. So I was admitted into a 6-year doctorate program for physical therapy, and it was a combined program with athletic training. I know a lot of people, when you think of athletic training, it's a bit of a misnomer because people think that you're training athletes, but you're the guys wearing the khakis and the fanny packs and running onto the field when a person gets hurt, and you're doing the taping the ankles before the games, So people think that like you're actually training them, and that's part of it, but that's like a fraction of what you do. But yeah, I was admitted into a doctorate program for physical therapy, a dual program with athletic training. So it was a 7-year program. Went to Boston, had an amazing experience there, met a lot of great people. I was heavily involved on campus. So I was like an RA. I was a student advisor, student ambassador for orientation. I enjoyed my classes there. I really enjoyed kind of the challenge with all the different sciences. And what I appreciated about the athletic training program is that there was a clinical portion to the program where each trimester you'd be assigned a team. So you'd have a certain amount of hours that you would have to commit. And so I think my first year I was assigned with like women's ice hockey. So after class, I'm going to practice I'm going to the women's ice hockey practice, and I am shadowing an athletic trainer. So I'm there, I'm taping ankles, I'm at the games, and I am kind of the apprentice to an athletic trainer, a certified athletic trainer. So that happened pretty much every trimester that I was in school. So I had different kind of rotations. I think my most favorite was working with the men's basketball team my senior year. I worked with them for a whole year. So you travel, you go to the games. So you're trying to balance that in school. But it was an amazing experience.
And it seems like it puts you back into your realm of being with diverse people, because
for sure,
the people groups that may not normally mesh on campus, you got to be a fly on the wall at in every single organization. That's really
exactly.
Really neat, man.
Exactly. I think even just being an ambassador for orientation and meeting the new students who are coming each year that were starting in the fall, it was just a great opportunity to just interact with students and parents, incoming students, and kind of show them the way and answer questions and make sure they're ready to get the year started. And then working with athletes, that was an amazing experience because a lot of them are coming from all over the world as well. And then being a RA, living in a dorm and managing that part and just interacting with the people that lived in my building and developing relationships with them. So I look back at my experience at BU and just Boston in general. Boston was really good to me, even after. So I'm sure like the next question is like, well, why aren't you an athletic trainer or physical therapist?
We're going to get there.
So,
the journey, I was wondering how right. we get to teaching in Saudi Arabia. But
Exactly. So, as much as I enjoyed the experience of being an athletic trainer and being around athletes, there was definitely something that was still missing for me. And it wasn't, it was sometime around my senior year where I was like, this is fun, but I just couldn't see myself doing this forever. And I just like something was missing. I didn't really feel fulfilled by the work. And I had always worked with young people. Like when I was in high school, I worked at an after school program. I tutored all the time. When I was in college, I mentored with this organization called like Straight Ahead Ministries. And their job was their job was to help and support young people who were kind of getting out of jail and trying to kind of acclimate themselves back to society and getting back into school. And I worked and I mentored with that organization, and I tutored, and I was in schools and I was volunteering, and I just felt more fulfilled from that work. But I still was shying away from going into teaching because I always looked at teaching as the thing that people kind of fall into when they're not good at anything else, sadly. And that's just being honest. Like that's how I looked at teaching at first when I was in my 20s. And then I was like, the narrative out there, teachers don't make any money. That also played a role because, I want to make sure that, I can give back to, I have a well-paying job, so I can give back to my mom who sacrificed so much for us growing up. So I'd always shied away from it. But then, I said, I'll take some time. I ended up graduating with my bachelor's in athletic training, and I took some time off to just kind of figure out what was next. And, I just found myself like over time, just organically, I was going into one of my fraternity brothers, he was a teacher, a science teacher. I went into his class and I was helping out over there. I was working at a program called Upward Bound. I don't know if you've heard about Upward Bound. I was working with them, and I was working with them during the academic year, but also during the summer, which was an amazing experience. And then over time, I just was like I love developing and connecting with young people, but I just had grown tired of being like an ancillary part of their development. I felt like I was on the outside looking in, and I was like, how do I have like a greater impact in their lives? And then I found my way into teaching. Yeah, it was like I got to get into the classroom, and teachers spend like 6 hours a day with students, and I was like, here's where I can really like have an impact and kind of feel my boat move, if you will. So yeah.
And so how do you get from being at BU to becoming a teacher?
Yeah, so I think I took like a couple years off while I was like, after graduating my bachelor's in athletic training. I didn't work a day as an athletic trainer. I knew that wasn't something that I wanted to do. So I kind of put all my energy and efforts into kind of figuring out what was next. And once I did, I ended up applying to just, a bunch of grad schools in the area. I ended up applying to like Boston College, I think UMass and Harvard. And then I was accepted into Harvard. I ended up accepting the offer to go to Harvard for grad school. So they had an urban education program there.
How was the Harvard as an education? It's a renowned institution.
Yeah.
Give us the insight of a Harvard grad.
Yeah, it's so funny because when I think back to my experience at Harvard, if I'm being like 100% honest, it was a really tough experience. Like, Darian, I was dealing with, like, shortly after the moment I got my acceptance, I remember, I think I was tutoring a young person at the time, and I remember just kind of running off and like calling all of my friends, and like I was so amped up. And then like moments after that like elation like shifted into like imposter syndrome, like times 100. You know what I mean? So this wasn't something that stayed with me for a night, Darian. This was something that literally stayed with me my entire experience at Harvard. It was something that those feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt, I took to my first class. I took to all the classes thereafter. And like the load, it was pretty, over time, it just became harder to carry. I graduated and where things worked out well. And, even along the way, I got really positive feedback from all of my teachers, but I was really in my head, and it was kind of like a defining moment. I look back at that experience and I think, I'm 12 years removed from grad school. And those same kind of feelings, those knots in my stomach that I felt when I was at Harvard, or those feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt, they still are with me today. The only difference is that my experience at Harvard was kind of like my awakening. It was the first time in which I was like consciously aware of the negative narrative that was playing in my head. And I couldn't use kind of like my savvy or my intellect to kind of work around it. I had to face it head on, and I had to kind of come up with coping strategies and ways to just kind of like sit with those feelings. So today, it's kind of a daily practice of me kind of reminding myself that I'm a capable human being, that despite some of the anxieties that I experience with new opportunities and new challenges, that I have what it takes. But that was it was a really defining moment in my life, and one in which I'm thankful for, because I felt like it was the moment in which I kind of began to get to know who Adrian is, or who I am.
And where do you think the negative narrative was derived from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it was just me drinking the Kool-Aid, because Harvard is like, you grow up, Harvard is like the pinnacle, right? And so,
yeah.
And then part of it was just, I think, if I had to say, I'd probably attribute it to the fact that I could have been challenged a little bit more growing up, put in situations that forced me to kind of reach beyond my grasp and really stretch myself academically and emotionally. And I feel like that was really the first time in my life where I not only was like drinking the Kool-Aid about what that experience would be like, but I was beginning to like question myself whether or not like I measured up. And I hadn't been in any other spaces where I questioned myself in that way. Everything worked out in the end, and I'm really thankful for that experience because I feel like I learned a lot about myself.
Huh. I wonder, I think there is a point where you kind of realize that it's not that people are naturally smarter than you.
Right.
It's just
Right.
the work that you put in.
Exactly. Exactly. And it taught me a lot about kind of like, preparation, and just kind of like I just needed to work a little bit hard. I had to work a little harder, and I needed to invest time, and things came to me like relatively easy. I didn't have to study that hard. I didn't have to do things when I was in college. I worked hard, but I just didn't have to like push myself to the max in that way. And when I got to Harvard, I definitely needed to apply myself in a different way. And things worked out really well. I got really positive feedback along the way. But even in spite of that, it just didn't do anything for kind of how I was feeling at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like such as life. And again, it was really a defining moment for me, and I'm thankful for that opportunity. Shortly thereafter, I ended up, I went to when I was in at Harvard. Everybody thought that like I was kind of debating whether or not I wanted to teach science or I wanted to teach math. And a lot of my coursework in undergrad, I had a lot of like biologies, biochemistries, physics. So everyone was kind of pushing me in the direction of teaching science. So shortly after graduating, I ended up taking a job in the Dorchester area of Boston at a pilot middle school, and I taught science there for 5 years. That was my first teaching job. Just to give you kind of sense of what the school is like, it's like 100% free or reduced lunch, like 98% Black and Hispanic. Yeah, it was an amazing experience, an incredible experience. It was fun. It was hard. It was at times heartwarming and at times heartbreaking. It was the experience that I needed, because at 26, 25, I just, I was really eager, and I had a lot of energy, and I wanted to make a difference. And I was sitting there on the couch with my laptop. It's pretty common for me to be sitting there till 10, 11 p.m. each night, either grading or preparing for the next day, and that was just normal. So
Yeah.
I was staying at work
Yeah.
until 4 or 5, 6 o'clock. It was just like what we did, and a lot of my classmates who I taught with, or my peers at Harvard, a couple of them went over to that same school that I was at. So it's just kind of like what we did. But it was a really awesome opportunity. I learned a lot about myself, met a lot of great people, and, just developed relationships with kids that I'll just, cherish forever. A lot of them will message me on Facebook and reach out, and
Really?
makes me feel kind of old because some of them are like 20. What is it? Goodness. Like I've been teaching for 12 years. So they're like 25, 26. Some of them, finished their grad programs. They're reaching out. They have kids. And I'm like, goodness, I remember when you were sitting in my 7th grade science class. It was awesome. Just, starting out in Boston, and, it was an easy transition because I went there for undergrad, so I was familiar with the area. Did grad school there, so it was kind of nice to kind of give back to the community in which I had kind of like had given me so much.
It seems like you go from diverse to less diverse to more diverse to less, because now you're in a place in Saudi Arabia where you're in a diverse place seemingly. Again, how do you make the transition from? I'm not sure if Dorchester is inner city.
It is inner city.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yep.
How do you make the transition from Dorchester, or what happens in your life to move you from Dorchester to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, so in between there, I ended up, after 5 years of teaching science, I'd made the decision that like, hey, as much as I enjoy science, it wasn't really the subject that like turned me on. And I was like, all right, I always loved math growing up. And so I decided I was going to make the transition to math. And at that time, I felt like it was a really good, like I wanted to give a shot and try a different district. I had a close friend who was a principal in the Cambridge public school system. And so I ended up teaching math for 2 years in Cambridge public schools, still Title I district, but they had a lot of resources. I think at the time they were spending the most per pupil in the country. So we were in a brand new kind of like state of the art building, and like there were a lot of resources. So that was interesting, kind of going from Boston, where we barely had textbooks, and you could see that there was a huge kind of opportunity gap there. And then when you go over to Cambridge, and there's an abundance of resources, and it's still Title I, but you're seeing like now, because we have these resources, and we're able to kind of like, I was able to kind of feel my power a little bit more in the classroom. After 2 years in Cambridge, my wife and I just decided like, hey, right now we're without kids, and it's just her and I. Let's kind of give this teaching over abroad a shot. After going through that process, we ended up in Saudi Arabia, and it was a bit of a transition. I'm not going to lie, like getting into a classroom, and you're used to, when I was working in Boston, it felt like I was wearing so many hats when I was in the classroom. Right? I was not only the teacher, but I was like at times the therapist. I was sometimes the doctor. I was sometimes oftentimes looked at as the person that would be best equipped to give tough love, because I'm the black guy, I'm the black man, and I look just like, the kids who are in front of me. So I was looked at as the disciplinarian. And then going to Cambridge, I started to I felt like I was kind of making a transition where I was just I had the space to kind of focus on teaching and focus on my craft. And there weren't the same kind of hills that I needed to climb. And then transitioning here, it took a while. At first, it was a completely different experience, because I was meeting children who, I would ask them where they're from, and they're giving responses like me. They're like, my dad's from here, and like, but I'm from here, and I lived here for and so these third culture kids who are kind of like in a diverse setting, and this is all that they've known. But one of the things that I really kind of appreciated is that, this kind of ecosystem that we are in kind of has provided them with the space to just kind of be children, and just to and just to kind of focus on their education and focus on their sports, and they're not dealing with a lot of the other, I don't know, the other stressors that some of the students were dealing back home. So that was, I felt like I could just focus on teaching, and it was a necessary change. I think it was me going from Boston to Cambridge, and from Cambridge to Saudi Arabia. As much as it was me looking for a new experience, it was also me kind of putting myself first, because I had kind of been burnt out over time working in the Boston public school systems, and working in these high need districts. I was kind of debating if I still even wanted to be a teacher, because I just had put so much energy in. And as much as it, you have your victories, and you hear back from students every now and again, that's kind of, at times it felt like it was few and far between. And so I just knew that I needed to put myself first, and so yeah, here I am.
I think it's interesting, because it's a plight that many may not understand, and maybe some do. But as a black male, it's almost like you can't go pursue anything until you go back. Because I did the same thing. You go back, you teach into a low SES district. You got to go there. I'm not sure if it's like earning your clout or whatever, but I not until I got here did I realize that not everyone feels that pull. We don't necessarily have to. It's not a have to.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's not a have to.
You feel the pull to do it. And,
right.
And you do it, and it kind of feels a certain section in your soul.
It's tough because once you make the decision as a black male to go into education, like there's very few of us, right? So they're already like, we know where to put you. We want to put you here, right? And you're going to have such an amazing impact with these young people. And it's really easy. Like, I firmly believe that if you're not, my dad always says that if you're not kind of aware of your own agenda, you'll become somebody else's agenda. And so I believe that, like, there's this huge push. And for me, I got into education because I did want to have a greater impact in the lives of poor black and brown children. Like, that was it. Like, I wanted to make an impact. And then over time, I was just like, okay, now I've given so much, and I just felt like I didn't have anything really left for me. And so like I knew over time this wouldn't be sustainable. So I was debating, do I still want to teach? And then I was like, no, I really enjoy teaching, but it just has to happen in a different environment. And even, today, I don't know if you'd call it survivor's guilt, but sometimes I sit here in Saudi Arabia and there's a tremendous amount of guilt that I feel, because I'll look in some of my classmates and some of the people I taught with are still teaching back in Boston. And for a while I was just like, well, what's wrong with me? And why couldn't I stick it out? But ultimately, I did what I felt like, was best for me. And, I mentally, I feel that much better. And I think overall, it's just been a great experience for me and my family. And it'll be an amazing experience for my kids growing up here.
It's interesting because oftentimes I think we get pulled into a monolith. But from listening to your story is just as much connected to being an international, multicultural individual,
right,
as it is to being, a part of Black culture as well.
Exactly.
When you talk about your origins, it's very diverse, and so, because I have survivor's guilt or, guilt from as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to explore different parts of myself. I have no problem exploring, inner city, and loved every part of it, and give every piece of myself to that. But I also want to explore some of these diverse angles and, looking at your heritage and where family comes from, and it can be quite difficult to explore the various spectrum of
Exactly.
who you are if you're in specific environments.
Well said. Well said. I think this journey, I've learned so much about myself. And like you said, I wouldn't necessarily have the mental space, the resources to be able to do that if I was still back home. And so, yeah, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity. I'm happy that my wife was down to give it a shot. And yeah, it's been a fun ride, and I'm just even more excited for my children to grow up in an environment that's really kind of mirrors the environment that I experienced when I was in Toronto. They'll come home and they'll talk about, their friends. They're at daycare right now, and they're like, they have friends who, are Arab friends. They have friends whose parents are from the States. They have some friends whose parents are Canadian. It's been kind of, I really just appreciate kind of the life that we are being able to provide them with this experience working here.
Mr. Hoquee, I know you have to go, but I want to ask you one question.
Yes.
Okay? And then we'll head on out. So
okay.
You have to give your children.
Yes.
And you have twins.
I do have twins.
All right, so...
Man, I have twins, and I did not even go into this game of because we wanted kids, but I never thought twins would even be possible, at all. So I have a funny story about that, but I know we're running out of time. So go ahead and ask your question.
You're more potent than you know you are. All right,
man. So Darian, let me tell you this: my wife, it was about 100% certainty that we were going to have twins, but I didn't find that out until the doctor walked into the room during the ultrasound and said, "Hey, do you notice anything special here?" So every grandchild on my wife's side, on my wife's mother's side of the family, has a set of twins.
Every
grandchild.
What?
Every grandchild. So her grandmother was a twin, and they say it skips generations.
Yeah.
Every grandchild has a set of twins. Gave birth to a set of twins.
That's
on her mother's.
That's something you bring up on the first date. I need to know.
Right. So then I'm all here. We're getting ready to onboard. Our paperwork was taking a while for Saudi Arabia. We decided, all right, we're going to go out to Las Vegas. We had got rid of all of our stuff. We're hanging out at my parents' house. We go out to Las Vegas, Darian, and what happened in Vegas didn't stay in Vegas. They're running around. They're running around in my house right now. They're 3.5 running around in my house. So yeah. But I'm sorry, man. What was your question?
All right, my last question. All right. So I love your father saying, if you don't know your own agenda, you'll become a part of someone else's.
Yeah.
You have one saying that you can leave with your kids. You're going to leave them with a wealth of knowledge, just by talking to you. I know you're going to leave them with a wealth of stuff. But one thing, this podcast, they're going to listen to this far beyond your years. And you have one thing that you want to leave to your twins that they can carry with them forever. What do you say to them?
Oh, wow. That's deep.
Pause for dramatic effect.
Wow. If I had to say anything to them, I would tell them to grab hold to their inner child and to never let go. I think about what being a father has taught me, and like my kids, they've just like reminded me about so much about acceptance and have reminded me about how important it is to express your emotions, because kids will just tell you how they feel. Like they live in the moment. They find joy in like the simple pleasures. They're curious. They're fearless. So I would tell them to kind of like hold on to their inner child, because I think that over time, whether it's life, schools, institutions, whatever, I think over time, like we lose that inner child, and we're not as curious, and we're not living in the moment. We're worried about, I spend so much time trying to just stay in the present. Like I have to consciously remind myself to remain in the present. And so I would tell them to grab hold to their inner child and to never let go.
I tell you, Adrian Hoquee.
Hoquee, man. Hoquee.
Adrian Hoquee. It has been truly a pleasure. I feel like I know you a little bit better, not just when you're talking trash on the football field.
Oh man, I talk trash knowing that there are very few times I have to line up against you, so that's why I talk my trash, because I know that like if I had to line up against you, I probably wouldn't be saying anything to
you. Well, it has been awesome, sir, and thank you so much for your time, and we are thankful for the opportunity just to know you.
Thanks, Darian.
Thank you for listening to Just to Know You.
We would like to thank our amazing tech man, Mr. Kent Arimura, Sterling McDonald for the podcast music, and the SAES community. See you next time.
If you know anyone who you think has a great story to tell, we would love to hear about it. Please send an email to either Angela, Darian, or Kent.